Hey, it's, I don't know what, Friday, yeah. It's Friday the 13th, actually, and the band has a concert tonight. And I'm trying to work up the last bit of this sermon on grace. The sermon series we're doing at the community church is all about feasting on grace. Sort of inspired by Alton Brown and all those guys, the whole feasting on asphalt or feasting on waves thing, but not to completely plagiarize, we're just calling it a feast of grace, because feasting on grace sounds too much like plagiarism. Anyway, I usually preach these things like from my house or something like this for the internet, and it seems like a waste of time for some reason. I don't know why. Boring, I think is the word I was looking for. I'm sitting in a room, not at all like church, at least what I like about church. So I wanted you to see the sanctuary. Yeah. This is usually where I preach. I preach in coffee shops. I've attempted to preach in a bar last night. It's a long story. Oops, there we go. But anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about this. This is a really short sermon, actually. At the end of the sermon, I'm going to sing U2's Grace. She carries the world on her hips. No champagne flute for her lips, no twirls or skips. Between her fingertips, she carries a pearl in perfect condition. The scripture passages, we have Psalm 42, the whole wonderful stuff about panting for the water brooks and all that. And then the gospel passages from the second chapter of Mark, 10th verse onward, where Jesus has healed somebody and the Pharisees are all bent out of shape because he's eating with the sinners and tax collectors. And he says, I've actually come for people who are broken and not people who've got their stuff worked out. Now, I don't know who actually has their stuff worked out. That's a different sermon for a different day. But let's just say that he's coming for people like me, and maybe like you, don't want to speak for you, but certainly like me, who are just a little bit broken, or maybe a lot broken, depending on the day, and how little sleep I've gotten. This is one of those days. What I want to talk about, holding all these things together, holding this whole concept of grace, this idea of grace being a place that meets us in the dirt. Grace carries the world on her hips. I love this image. And it's romantic, it's feminine, it's nurturing, it's mothering, but it's also work. I mean, grace is work. It's not just sitting around, please give me grace. It's not Fred Astaire grace. I mean, Fred Astaire had a certain kind of grace, but it's not that kind of thing. It's not pretty, but it's beautiful. Grace is work. Grace gets in the ditches, it gets in the dirt, it has dirt under its fingernails. Grace, and she's beautiful. There's this part of me that wants to have a romance with grace. She carries the world on her hips. In the Chicago Tribune this week, there was an article about the number of gun-related homicides in Chicago public schools. We're at 27 or something like that. This is the sum total from last year, and we're already there this year, and it's March. As opposed to the usual kinds of articles that show up about this issue, where you have someone saying gun control, gun control, gun control, or someone saying where are the politicians or where are the churches. This particular article did something interesting, for my estimation at least. It focused on how complicated the issue is. It's not enough to put police officers at bus stops. It's not enough to put police officers at train stations, or even put metal detectors in your schools. None of that actually works. So what do we do? How do we keep our children safe? How do we keep one another from killing each other? I'm not sure it's possible. The trick is to recognize grace in the midst of terror and horror. There's a woman who was quoted in the article, a pastor who works down there in one of the areas that's most affected in Chicago. She said, I pray that they all find God. Now, at first, this seems like a really trite statement. How contrived that they find God, how sweet. But really, no, really, What if we were to all find grace? What if we were to all actually pray for grace, that grace move in the world? Not just in the usual sit around and hold hands, though I think that will help, but pray that grace move us to fall in love with her. What if we all fell in love with grace? What if we all fell in love with this woman who carries the world on our hips, and then found us wanting to do the same ourselves, wanting to carry the world on our hips, to get our feet and our hands dirty, to pray, to absolutely sit in those circles and hold hands and then get up together and walk out into the world and see what we can do. This is what grace is about. She makes beauty out of ugly things. She finds goodness in everything. She finds beauty in everything. I'll talk for about 5 minutes. I'll sing U2's tune. It's also the Feast of St. Patrick. We've moved it. I'm in an Irish band and it's fun to do. A little Irish music. Move the feast day. It's on Tuesday this year, so we're moving it to the previous Sunday and we're letting it rip. Anyway, that's the sermon essentially. I'll clean it up. I'll tinker with it so it makes more sense. But there you go. I'd love to know your thoughts. And yeah, if you can, come to church. Hear a little Irish music. Talk about grace. See you later.